Okay, so good morning. I'm sorry that we had to change the timing and I had to rush you guys a little bit, but I have another webinar in the afternoon and evening. So I thought that we should cancel the lecture. So let me just talk to you about DDH and clarify a lot of confusion and thoughts, probably help you understand better, answer better in exam so that you can pass your MS or DNB. Uh, so just 1 minute. Give me 1 minute. I think it's got blocked. Okay, can you see me? Hello, can you hear
Yes,
me? Yeah,
yes, sir.
okay.
Yes, sir. It's on. Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So if you know that people used to call this condition as CDH, and for a long period of time, people called it CDH. Even now, some of your examiners or you might say this is the case of CDH, but that word has been replaced by DDH. So congenital hip dislocation is replaced by developmental dysplasia of the hip. Now, the reason for change of terminology is that people have realized that every hip is not dislocated. It can be subluxated or unstable or dysplastic, which means underdeveloped, but it may not be dislocated. And the second thing they have realized is that every hip is not dislocated at birth, so it cannot be called congenital. It is developmental, that you may be having unstable hip which dislocates later. So which is why the terminology changed from CDH to DDH. Somebody might ask you this question. And the reason for that was ultrasound. Basically on ultrasonic examination and screening, people found that a lot of hips are not really dislocated but can dislocate and may progress to dislocation. So the new terminology is developmental dysplasia of the hip. CDH is now a term which is given up. And the reason being, as I said, it can be dislocated, it can be dislocatable, it can be subluxatable or dysplastic. And I will explain what it means. Dislocated means there is no contact between the socket and the ball, it is completely out. Dislocatable means it is unstable. On pressure, you can make it go out, but it comes back in. Subluxatable is you can make it unstable, move out, but it doesn't go out of the socket completely. It remains in the socket partially, but it is unstable. And dysplastic means the hip is located, but the indices on radiology, which means ultrasound or on X-ray in older children, are not really perfect, which means it is an underdeveloped hip which may predispose to early arthritis in later life. So you must remember that when you look at the spectrum of DDH, there are four things: dysplasia, subluxation, dislocatable, and dislocated. And the fifth variety is teratologic, which means intrauterine dislocation, which means it is out in the womb itself and it is a stiff dislocation which is not reducible. Okay, we'll talk about that later. So you must realize that there is a lot of hormonal interplay that is happening. Why the hip ligaments are lax? There are some physiological factors. A female child has inherent laxity because of sex hormones. Maternal hormones and relaxin can cause the ligaments to become lax. What are the risk factors for DDH? You must realize that a breech position, female sex, positive family history, and a background of either Icelandic, that is Laplander, or Native American, that is Indian Americans. They have found that the incidence of DDH is very high in these two genetic populations, and it may have to do something with the way they straddle their babies. In fact, even in India, if you see, our babies are also kept in extended position of the hip and knee and tied up tightly, which is not really healthy, which may cause dislocation. So when you see a baby which looks like this, now you have to realize one thing: DDH is a hidden disorder. Okay, CTV can be seen visually, but DDH has to be looked for. So when you see a child with this posture, which means he has plagiocephaly, or torticollis, which means neck and head is tilted to one side, or he has congenital hyperextension of the knee, or metatarsus adductus or club foot. It is important that the treating physician should actively screen for a hip dislocation. Okay, these are the positive features which are seen at birth, which should make you screen the hip. Always remember these factors, because otherwise you will miss a hip dislocation and that will cause trouble for the family and you later. What are the clinical tests for instability? Now, if you look at history, actually they were described by Lee Damney in 1912, where he described a palpable sensation that the hip moves in and out, and he called it the sign de ressort. Okay, but Ortolani in 1936, he was a pediatrician who described the pathogenesis and his diagnostic sign called the palpable sensation, the Senor dello Scotto, which means the feeling of the hip relocating. It was a relocation click. What about neonatal hip screening? Okay, now question is, in a very young age, which means less than 4 weeks of life, which hips should you screen and what are the screening methodologies? So why do you do hip screening? When do you do hip screening? And how do you do hip screening? These are the three things you should know. If you look at the history, neonatal hip screening is starting with good history taking. How many children in the family, how many male, how many female, anyone else in the family having a DDH, any problems during delivery or pregnancy. Now, a firstborn female breech presentation delivered by LSCS is high risk for DDH. So if you have a history profile which says all these factors, you must screen the hip for instability. Screening can be on clinical examination, where you will see that there is excessive or asymmetric. There are two things that you should remember: asymmetry and excessive folds, and they may be inguinal or gluteal. So look at two folds, gluteal fold line and the inguinal folds, and they must be increased in number. That means excessive folds because of the hip being out, there is crumpling of skin, or there may be asymmetry. Both these factors you should see. On hip examination, sometimes because the hip is out, there may be a looseness in extension. Okay, when you rotate the hip, it rotates too much in extension compared to normal side. And there could be an apparent abduction contraction of the opposite hip. You think that the opposite hip is too much in abduction. Actually, it may be that the affected hip has less abduction. You may find an opposite hip abduction contraction which may mislead you. So always be careful of these two findings. Then you know about the Gagliardi test, which means when you flex the hip and the knee, if one knee looks to be at a different level, when you look at it tangentially, you should suspect instability or DDH on one side. The Ortolani test, which is made so famous, is the test of relocation. So when you give a gentle traction and abduct and externally rotate, you feel a click. This is the click of relocation. Now the problem with Ortolani test, I will tell you, the drawback of Ortolani test. Ortolani test assumes two things. It assumes, one, that the hip is completely dislocated. Second, it assumes that it is relocatable, which means reducible. Now both these things may have an error. If there is a teratologic dislocation, which means intrauterine dislocation, which makes the hip stiff, the hip may be out, but it is not reducible. So you may think this is Ortolani negative, which means no dislocation. That is not true. So there is a false negative there. Okay, so this is the error in Ortolani. And second, it is the skill of the examiner and experience, whether you can illustrate or elicit this test of reducibility. And the third problem is that it does not tell you about instability. It assumes full dislocation. If there is instability or subluxation, then you may feel Ortolani is negative. So these are the drawbacks of Ortolani test, for which you have this Barlow test. Now the Barlow test is in two steps. One is you adduct, internally rotate and give a push on the knee, and you will feel that the hip is slipping out. And then you reverse the maneuver, which is like Ortolani. So Barlow part 2 is Ortolani, and then you feel it coming back. So that tells you two things. One, the hip is unstable, and second, it is reducible. Again, teratologic dislocation, this does not hold true. So based on clinical guidelines of Ortolani and Barlow test, you can classify hips into four groups. One, where it's an observation hip, which means high risk factors, but clinically there is nothing. Group 2, Barlow positive, which means provocative Barlow 1 is positive. Group 3, Ortolani positive, which means Barlow 2 is also positive, which means it is dislocatable but reducible. And group 4, where both are negative, but still there is dislocation, which is teratology or irreducible hips. Now, what next? The next thing is to do X-rays or ultrasound. Now, we are more used to looking at X-rays. X-rays don't show you the cartilaginous head. They give you limited information and you may have false negativity. But still, you can make out some things on X-ray, which I will talk about later. Second is it involves giving radiation to the baby, which ultrasound avoids. But it can be very useful to rule out proximal femoral deficiencies and infections. What about ultrasound? Now, ultrasound is a very useful method. It can show you all cartilaginous structures. It can show you in 3 dimensions because you can move the probe all the way around. It is dynamic. You can do push-pull. You can do reduction maneuvers. It is very sensitive and you can pick up a lot of things. It is safe because it does not involve any radiation. You can get immediate results. And it is very convenient to do it on a neonate. Now, there are other advantages, like it is good for follow-up. You can monitor sequentially. You can monitor the treatment in brace. You can detect iatrogenic posterior dislocations, and you can evaluate how the acetabulum develops. But there are some drawbacks to this ultrasound. What are the drawbacks? One is the expense may be higher than an X-ray. Second, it is highly operator dependent, which means you need to be trained in the graph method of how to do the ultrasound. And you might have false positive tests. And as the child becomes older, once the ossific nucleus appears after 6 months, it becomes less and less useful and X-rays take more role. So neonatal hip screening by ultrasound is useful only in the first 3 to 6 months of life. After that, it has limited value. And this is Professor Graf taught us how to do the hip screening. We had Graf courses in Pune twice, and he gave us this classification of 4 types of hips. From normal, 1 and 2A, 2B are essentially normal, but 2C onwards is a unstable or a dislocated hip. So the alpha and beta angles have to be measured, which tell you about the bony roof and the cartilaginous roof and the position of the head. Okay, so those who are interested in detail should read up Graf's original articles. So in the German-speaking Europe, all countries have neonatal hip screening by ultrasound as a mandatory test to be done, which means every newborn is screened with ultrasound. Okay, whereas a lot of places do selective screening of only high-risk babies because they feel it is unnecessary or it may be too expensive or it may give a lot of false positive. So the use of ultrasound is guided reduction of a dislocated hip to check in Paulich harness how is the stability and how is the development of the hip, and some anatomic evaluation can be done without any X-ray or radiation. But all of us may not have access to ultrasound or may not be conversant with how to read an ultrasound. So if you still don't read ultrasound, what can you do? You still do your X-rays, but you draw some lines. What are these lines? They are the Perkins line, which is a vertical line from the outer border of the acetabulum and a transverse line going through the triradiate cartilage. So the Hilgenreiser line is the horizontal line and the vertical line is the Perkins line. Remember H for H, and draw the Shenton's line. Okay, the Shenton's line is important to say whether the hip is in center or no. And in the lateral X-ray, you draw a line along the shaft, which is called the von Rosen line. So this is the transverse H line of Hilgenreiner, vertical P line of Perkin, and then you see inferomedially where is the metaphyseal beak of the neck. If it is pointing in the inferomedial quadrant, your hip is located. If it is in the inferolateral quadrant, it is subluxated, and if it is in the superolateral quadrant, it is dislocated. As illustrated here, the right hip is located, the left hip is subluxated. So these are the source of the newborn.
Sorry to disturb, sir. Voice
Out of
is
every
breaking,
60
sir.
hips. Okay, now is it okay now?
Yes, sir. Okay, okay.
Has it improved?
Yes, sir. It's
Okay.
improved. Yes.
It's okay. So just sometimes there is this problem, just bear with me. Out of every 60 infants born has actually some instability, which is positive Barlow sign. But more than 60% of these in the of life % stay with the first two any specific treatment. What does that tell you? A lot of neonatal hip screening may detect instability, but it does not progress to dislocation. But the remaining 12% can go into dislocation. Okay, so selective screening and repeated examinations may be important. Most unstable hips will stabilize soon after birth, but about 12% may go to subluxation or dislocation. A lot of them may remain located, but still retain dysplasia features, which can be managed at an older age. So all newborns with clinical instability should be treated. What about the older child? Now, what I spoke till now, please remember as residents were screening tests. Okay, ultrasound is for screening, ortolani is for screening, Barlow is for screening. Please, in your exam, you will never get a neonate. You will always get a child who is walking age. And a walking age, if you say Barlow test or ortolani test, you will be failed. Because these are not tests to be done at 1 year of age. They have to be done less than 2 months of age. Understand that very, very clearly. The older child, they will come with a painless limb, with a short limb gait, with asymmetry, and may complain of some palpable or audible ticks around the hip. On examination, you will find restricted abduction, and you may have telescopic sign positive, or you may have a Galeazzi sign, which shows that the hip is shortened on one side, supratrochanteric. So the findings in a walking age have to be different. Restricted range of abduction, shortening of the limb with a painless limb. If it is bilateral, you will get a waddling gait. Okay, so if see this, you will see widening of the perineum, a gap between the legs which is high, and a side-to-side waddling Trendelenburg type of gait with hyperlordosis. So if you see, yeah. So if you see a large perineal gap or a hyperlordotic spine with a waddling Trendelenburg gait in a child who is otherwise painless, think of bilateral DDH. Okay. Investigation wise, at this age, ultrasound has no role, as I said. So you have to do gold standard X-rays, AP, and frog leg view. And on this, these are the things you should mark: the Shenton's line, the Perkins line, the Hilgenreiner lines, and then center edge angle and acetabular index, which tells you what is the dysplasia. Okay. Also look for the medial gap. Is there an increase in the medial gap, and what is the acetabular index? Higher investigations are not indicated for DDH, except when you are doing in older child and planning for osteotomies around the hip. You can do a 3D CT. If you suspect infection, you can try to do an ultrasound, and an MRI is for irreducible hips or to look for AVN changes. Routinely, a dislocated hip, you do not do any advanced investigation. A plain X-ray is good enough. Now, what happens to these hips if you leave them alone? So the natural history of complete dislocation depends on two factors: the presence or absence of a well-developed false acetabulum, and whether it is unilateral or bilateral. 24% chance is there of a good clinical result with a well-developed false acetabulum. But if your false acetabulum is moderately developed or is absent, a higher number of patients have a good clinical result because the hip is flail, they have no pain. Okay, but they will be unstable. A unilateral complete dislocation will always be a more problematic case because there is shortening, limb length inequality, the knee will go into valgus and will have medial collateral overstretch and instability and lateral compartment osteoarthritis. Okay, and end up with arthritis in the early age of their life. So let's talk about management of DDH. So I gave you 4 groups. In the neonate, you have 4 groups. Group 1, as I said, was the observation hip, which means physical exam was normal, but there were high risk factors, or there was a hip click which was felt by the screening physician. What do you do? As I said, within 2 months, most of the hips will auto stabilize. So 6 weeks later, re-examination and with ultrasound, stable and there are no abnormal findings, you can just observe, take an X-ray at about 6 months to confirm that hip is located and discharge if the above are normal. The group 2 hips are dislocatable, which are Barlow positive, which means unstable hips. Now, at 2 months, you can put them in a Paulich harness and
Sir, voice is breaking again, sir. Sorry.
3 months better. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Hello, Sandeep sir. Hello.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Now we can hear you. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes. Everyone just stay for 2 minutes. Sir is joining again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. We can see your screen.
Yeah, now I'll start again from that slide. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. It's clear, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. So the protocol, as I said, for a dislocatable Barlow positive hip is Paulich harness, repeat ultrasound at 6 weeks in examination, and then 3-month X-ray, and wean off after 1 to 2 months after the hip becomes clinically and radiologically stable in extension. But always keep a follow-up because even if the hip is stable, there may be residual dysplasia which may need attention. Third group is a dislocated hip, which is ortolani positive, which means reducible hip. So when the hip is reducible, you put the child in a Paulich harness and again weekly ultrasound for 3 to 4 weeks so that you ensure reduction and monitor your position. At 6 weeks and 3 months, an X-ray and clinical examination. After radiologically and clinically the hip becomes stable, then you start weaning over 2 to 3 months, 1 hour every 4 hours, till the hip becomes clinically and radiologically stable in extension, because the child is going to walk in extension. And then follow up at 1 year, take an X-ray, see that the hip is in, but yearly X-rays and follow up to look for residual dysplasia. So early management involves two things that you should understand. One is repositioning in a reducible hip and reduction in a dislocated hip. Paulich harness is sometimes examiner ask about Paulich harness. It is to be used when there is an early diagnosis made. Your parent should be reasonably educated and compliant. And there is a lot of intensive monitoring, like I said, weekly checkups with ultrasound and clinical examination. But it is a wonderful device because it repositions the reducible and subluxated hips into correct direction. How does it work? It guides the hip into flexion and abduction, and the spontaneous gentle kicking movement allows a reduction with low rate of AVN. But the important part is monitoring. If you hyperflex, a dislocation which was superolateral in extreme flexion can become posterior, and iatrogenic posterior dislocations are very difficult to treat. So it also promotes vestibular development. Now, what are the pitfalls of this? You should understand that teratological or syndromic stiff hips should not be treated with Paulich harness. This is a contraindication. Second, if there is a neuropathic hip dislocation, which means meningomyelocele, there is muscle imbalance, Paulich is contraindicated because it will over-reduce and cause different kind of dislocation. And extreme ligamentous laxity, like syndromes like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or Marfan, you shouldn't use it. Again, teratologic dislocation, paralytic dislocation, Paulich harness is not the way to treat. It requires open reduction. What are the results of treatment? Parents always want to know. In a Paulich harness, as you can see, the results are very good if it is a dislocatable hip, 100% results. In a dislocated hip, it is 85%. But even if the hip becomes stable, there is 20% incidence of late acetabular dysplasia, which may require management further on. What happens when the child becomes older? Now we move from 6 months to 18 months. Now in the first group, again, as I said, it is a reducible dislocation. So when it is a reducible dislocation in an older child, the treatment is done by giving a hip spica. Okay, so you reduce and you give the hip spica for about 6 weeks, and you may change the spica and again continue for 12 weeks, followed by abduction orthosis till a normal clinical and radiological examination in extension, and then again X-ray every year for dysplasia. But the pitfall is, how do you know that the reduction is accurate? Okay, so that was the first group. I'll talk about how to decide whether the reduction is good. The second group is a dislocated hip. Now you can use traction to reduce the hip gently and gradually. So there is a Japanese paper on gradual longitudinal and then overhead traction for spontaneous reduction of dislocated hips in older children. After traction, you can convert to spica and then to abduction orthosis. So this is how they do it. They give longitudinal traction first and then traction in abduction. You can do it at home or in a hospital to stretch out gradually the soft tissues, and they have demonstrated a very low rate of AVN. Okay, so first give Bryan's traction and then flexion traction. When you reduce and put the child in a spica, you must assess what is known as the safe zone of Ramsay. So safe zone is when you do the reduction, what is the zone in which the hip remains stable? If the safe zone is large, more than 30 to 40 degrees, then it is safe. After anesthesia with traction and abduction, you reduce the hip and see at how much range it redislocates. If the zone is very narrow, it tells you that the adductor may be tight and you do a adductor tenotomy. But the most important part of this reduction is arthrography. You can never say whether the hip is reduced on the basis of a click. A click is not enough. What you need to do is an arthrogram. So you can see this particular hip, you can see the increased medial dipooling and the nice contour of the head as it lies dislocated when an arthrogram is done. After reduction, you must see this rose thorn. This is called a rose thorn appearance. When the head goes in the socket, the medial dipool is less than 2 millimeters and the cartilaginous labrum gives you a nice sharp rose thorn. In a dislocated hip, you don't see the rose thorn or it is blunted. So you must demonstrate a reduction with this arthrography. Sometimes you may put a K-wire to stabilize it and then you give a hip spica. Sometimes people may do a limited CT scan. You do a CT to confirm that the head lies into the socket without accurate documentation that it is reduced. You can never assume that hip is located just because you felt a click. The spica should be changed after 4 to 6 weeks and continue till the hip is clinically stable and acetabulum starts ossifying. Sometimes you may need to give plaster for up to 4 months and then continue with abduction orthosis. So an example, you can see this right hip is normal, left is dislocated. This is after reduction and spica. You can see the ossific nucleus here and the hip reduced very well. Another example, right hip dislocation. You can see the die. You can see that hip is reduced and then a spica is given in the human position as described by Salter, 40 to 45 flexion abduction, and don't give too much of abduction, not more than 45 because AVN may happen. What if close reduction fails? Okay, the next step is then you have to find out why is it not reducing. A reduction will fail if there are obstacles, and your examiners will always like to ask you what are the factors which block reduction, and they should be classified as intra-articular and extra-articular. The intra-articular obstacles to reduction are the pulvinar, which means fibrofatty tissue blocking the acetabulum, the thickened ligamentum teres, the transverse acetabular ligament which may be contracted, the inverted limbus, and hourglass constriction of the capsule as the iliopsoas passes in front of it and makes it narrow there. Okay, so these are the intra-articular obstacles to reduction. And if the hip remains out, obviously the muscles become shortened. So you will have extra-articular obstacles, which is iliopsoas which is short, adductors which are short, and the abductors which are short. So all of them may require to be released before you get a good open reduction. So open reduction, when do you do it? When there is difficulty in obtaining a close reduction or interpreting an arthrogram. It is more secure and the best for getting a good reduction and tightening the capsule surgically, right? So interpreting a good reduction depends on your knowledge with dye and arthrography, without which you can't comment. As I said, the small medial dipole and the sharp rose thorn are important. Walking age children, failed close reduction and syndromic hips are absolute indications for doing an open reduction. So what are the approaches of open reduction? There are two approaches, medial approach of Ludloff and an anterior approach of Somerville or modified Smith-Peterson. The medial approach has been described, it's more for younger kids to remove all obstacles so that you can get a good stable close reduction. But because the vessels are from the medial side, if you cut them or if you damage them, the AVN rates are supposed to be as high as 66%, though various papers have various rates from 10% to 60%. Okay, so this is the difficult area in which you have to approach. Unless you are experienced, most people avoid to do an open reduction medially. The commonly used approach is an anterior approach, which can give you a wider exposure. You can tighten up the capsule nicely. It's more cosmetic, and if you need to do Salter's osteotomy, it can be added to the same incision. You don't need another incision. So anterior Somerville approach, capsulography. When do you decide whether to add an osteotomy? So this is the paper which everybody should read. It's from UK, Middlesex. How do you decide whether the hip is stable after open reduction? So after you open the hip and reduce it, if it is stable in neutral position, an osteotomy is not needed. If you have to internally rotate and abduct the hip, then you may need to do a varus and derotation osteotomy. If you get hip stable in flexion, it means posterior acetabulum is well developed, anterolateral deficiency, then you will need a Salter osteotomy. If both are required, internal rotation, abduction and flexion, then you must do VDRO with Salter. And if you have a large double diameter acetabulum with a deficiency, you can use Pemberton's osteotomy. Okay, so varus osteotomy, if it is stable in abduction, internal rotation in an older child, primary shortening if it is teratologic, arthrogrypotic in more than 3 years of age. Salter osteotomy if high acetabular index or stable in flexion and child older than 3. Pre-op traction is controversial. Some examples, you can see the left hip dislocation here with a reasonable acetabular index. That's the frog leg view. So open reduction, the T-shaped capsulotomy and removal of all intra-articular obstacles. That is the head. Then you reduce it, do a good tight capsulorrhaphy. That is the critical step so that you remove the redundant capsule. That is how you suture it. And then give a spica. You can transfix it for 3 to 6 weeks with a K-wire, which you can remove later. So this is the reduction and K-wire. That is 3 months post-op. That is post-op bracing. And that is how the hip developed over 2 years. So you can see a nice looking head with a good acetabular remodeling. The younger the child, a good open reduction will encourage acetabular remodeling and you do not need to do an osteotomy every time. Another example, left hip dislocation, that are the Rosen's lines, that is the Shenton line restored after surgery. Over a period of time, you can see acetabulum developing and a good acetabular index at 18 months post-op and a very stable hip there with a very good clinical result and a very cosmetic scar. Another example, left hip dislocation, again open reduction K-wire, that is the hip, that is how it remodels, and that is how it develops. So this is how it goes if you do it well in time. Now, I will move through this. Always look for AVN and changes of AVN. If the head fails to grow within 1 year of your surgery, then there is AVN. What about an older child? In an older child, as I said, you may add a shortening and a varus derotation osteotomy. And the older the child, the lesser the acetabulum will remodel. So it's better to add an osteotomy after 4 years. Example, excessive anteversion and a valgus hip. So varus derotation osteotomy. And that is how it remodeled at 3 years. Teratologic dislocation, bilateral high hip dislocations, primary femoral shortening, varus osteotomy in stages, one at a time, over a period of time. That is how it developed, and that is a 3-year follow-up. Okay, so what does literature say? Literature says acetabular development. In 47 cases, they had 2 groups, closed reduction and open reduction. A high index of more than 25, 2 years post-reduction was considered dysplasia. And they found that compared to closed reduction, actually open reduction gave better remodeling, and the remodeling was best in the first year. And if the child was less than 3 years, if AVN happened, then there was less remodeling. So in this paper, they concluded that young children less than 3, you need not do acetabular procedure every time, and it will remodel best in the first year. But after 2 years, if there is a high acetabular index, you may need to add a later procedure. Okay, another paper talking about the same. So let me talk about acetabular procedures. Usually 4 years to 5 years and above with a well-located hip. The prerequisite for any acetabular procedure is an adequately reduced hip. Please remember, you can't talk about acetabular procedure when the hip is lying outside. First, get a good reduced hip with all contracture released, which is congruous with good range of motion. There are 2 types of acetabular procedures. One is what is called acetabuloplasty, which means an incomplete cut in the acetabulum, which hinges on different aspects of the triradiate cartilage. These include procedures described by Pemberton or Dega. Theoretically, they actually contract the acetabulum. They make it narrower or shallower because they are dependent on triradiate cartilage as the fulcrum. The second type of osteotomies are redirectional, where cuts are made in the bone completely. It's not an incomplete cut. Okay, when you cut only the ilium, it's Salter osteotomy. When you cut ilium and ischium, it is Sutherland's. And if you are cutting the pubis also, then it is the triple osteotomies of Tony, Steele, or Gans. So there are 3 types of osteotomies. These are complete cuts and not acetabiloplasties, and they redirect the acetabulum, but they will not contract it. It is repositioning of the acetabulum. So these involve complete cuts through the pelvic bones and rotation of the acetabulum. And finally, the last is a salvage procedure. These are called shelf procedures. This involves placing bone over the uncovered part of the hip on the capsule so that fibrocartilage forms. There are two types. One is Staheli shelf and second is the displacement osteotomy of Chiari. I'll show you examples of each. As I said, concentric reduction is a must for all kinds of osteotomies except Chiari or shelf, which can be done as salvage when the hip is still dislocated or subluxated. Okay, so this is an example of a well-located hip on the right side, but you see the acetabular index is high. So what is done is a Salter's osteotomy, a complete cut through the ilium with a bone graft anterolaterally so that the acetabulum is bent downwards to cover the anterolateral deficiency. This is the Salter's osteotomy, and this is its long-term follow-up. Triple innominate osteotomy divides all three pelvic bones when the child is older or it's become stiffer. So the fulcrum for Salter is the symphysis pubis. As the child becomes older, the symphysis pubis becomes stiffer, so it may not rotate. So then you have to cut the bone in more than one place. So this is an example of a dysplastic hip on the right side. And you can see a triple osteotomy where cuts have gone through ilium, ischium, and pubis. The whole segment is rotated, bone graft is put and fixed. So this is the osteotomy. Volume reducing osteotomies, which I spoke about, the acetabuloplasties, Pemberton and Dega, they result in a shallow acetabulum and contract the acetabulum. So this is how the Pemberton is done. It hinges on the triradiate cartilage. It doesn't cut the bone all the way across. On the triradiate, you bend the ilium. So this is an example. You can see it very well here. You can see the triradiate cartilage hinge. You put a laminar spreader and bring this bone down, and you are contracting the volume and put a bone graft there. So that is how it goes. A Dega is a similar, but it doesn't hinge on the triradiate. It hinges on the inner cortex of the sciatic notch. So you green stick it, and then you pack bone graft. But it is more versatile. You can put more graft anterior or posterior depending on where is the deficiency. So an example of a dislocated hip with a Dega osteotomy, and that is how it heals with a VDRO with a good acetabular index. And finally, the bone over capsule, Chiari and shelf, are salvage procedures. As you know, this is a medial displacement. So the head may be subluxated. You push, you cut the whole of ilium and medialize the whole fragment. And you can put a shelf there in addition. So the example of the left hip, and you can see how the entire hemipelvis is translated. So the uncovered part gets covered with this bone, which will form fibrous metaplasia and fibrocartilage. So this is not perfect hip, but it is giving good coverage. Okay, so the shelf Staheli, again you put a bone graft on the capsule and put cancellous graft on top of that, so that you do coverage of the head rather than containment. So you can see this bilateral dysplastic hips, and you can see bilateral shelf being done to cover that area without really doing anything to the rest of it. This is creating fibrocartilage, not hyaline cartilage. That is the difference between these procedures. So this is another example of a Sialese slotted shelf. This is a Sialese shelf with a varus to create a better congruency. To conclude, open reduction and capsulorrhaphy is a good procedure with excellent result in walking age. You should add VDRO shortening when indicated. Acetabular remodeling is seen in the first 3 to 4 years and can continue till 6 to 7 years, but the rate is best in 1.5 years after surgery. Pelvic osteotomies should be done in older age for residual dysplasia. So remember, you should screen high-risk babies, get a concentric stable reduction, add procedures to augment stability or coverage later, and keep them under follow-up till maturity. Always remember, a perfect reduction must be obtained for a normal hip, but not every perfect reduction results in a normal hip. Thank you very much, and I'll take any questions.
Yes, anybody having any doubt related to DDH, you can proceed to ask to sir. Anybody?
Sir,
Yes.
Hello, sir. Sir, can you please explain the position, sir, once more? The hip spica cast in a human position, sir.
The human Salter human position is about 70 degrees of hip flexion and about 40 degrees of abduction and about 25 to 45 degrees of external rotation. The aim should be to give the hip uh, a congruous reduction with documented arthrogram with a safe, stable zone. So the safe zone of Ramsey is important. If you are requiring about 90 degrees of abduction to get the hip in, it is a bad idea to do that. It's better to do an open reduction. The safe zone should be very, very wide. That means you should have a large range of stability. If you need extremes of position to get stability, it is better to do an open reduction. If you are not getting close reduction, better to do an open reduction. You can increase the safe zone by doing a adductor tenotomy. But the spica should be in comfortable position because avian rates directly correlate with extremes of position of spica.
Sir, but it is never 90-degree flexion, right, sir?
No, so you don't try to go higher and higher with flexion, abduction, or rotation. So
Okay.
upper limit is 90. Don't try to flex 100 degrees, 110 degrees to get a. You will get a posterior dislocation if you do that.
So in exam, sir, to answer, we should never say 90 in flexion, sir. Correct, sir?
No, you say that I will use the human position of Salter, which says you read it up. The literature will be there, but it should not try to exceed 90. Up to 90 is okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
So
Any other doubts?
how to measure alpha and beta angle on USG and what is the significance, sir? Please explain.
No,
Sir.
so alpha angle tells you what is the roof angle of the bony acetabulum. Acetabulum has two parts in the neonate, a bony roof and a cartilaginous roof. So the higher the alpha angle, it tells you that the bony roof is well developed. Okay, and the beta angle has to reduce. So what happens is that the cartilaginous part is getting ossified. So I think I can't explain to you in verbal terms. You will need a diagram. So I would recommend that you read Graf's paper. He has exactly pointed out in his article how to draw the lines from the margin of the acetabulum, the alpha and the beta angles, and the classification. I don't think any of your examiner will ask you about details of Graf classification because none of them know it. Yeah.
Okay, sir.
For MS or DNB, most of your examiners are not going to be digging into neonate. See, as I said in exam, this is a theoretical question because in exam you will never get a neonate. You are going to get a walking. And in that, don't talk of ultrasound, otherwise people will fail you. This is for your own knowledge. For neonatal hip screening by ultrasound, go and read Graf's paper. Everything is described beautifully.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other doubts? Please proceed.
Sir, how long the Paulic harness used, sir?
So Paulic harness should be kept till the hip becomes clinically and phonologically stable, which means your cartilaginous acetabular roof is ossifying, right? Second, on your clinical testing of, see, once the hip is reduced, every time you take the child for examination every month, you should do the Barlow test, maneuver, provocative maneuver. Every time after 2 days, as the ossification improves, provocative maneuver should become negative, which hip should not dislocate or subluxate. So full-time Paulic harness till the hip becomes sonologically and clinically stable. Then start weaning it off. And how do you wean it off? Give them off time for say half an hour in every 4 hours. Then increase it next one to 1 hour. Then you say only night bracing and keep on assessing. Final proof is at walking. In extension and with legs parallel, hip should not dislocate. So you must follow them up till that time. But full-time bracing till it is stable.
Sir, so then for follow-up, only it is only we will assess clinical evaluation
and sonography till the child is reaching 3-4 months of age. After that, you can take X-rays.
Okay.
Once the ossific nucleus comes, ultrasound. See, bone does not allow ultrasound waves to pass through. When ossification progresses, the sonography value drops. X-ray value improves.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, Sandeep sir,
Yeah.
the lecture was in very detail. They will residents will be able to write theory and practical both topics.
Yeah, yeah. I
Thank
think
you
I
very
put it
much,
in
sir.
great
Thank you very
detail.
much.
Yeah, you can rewind
Yes,
it
sir.
if you have recorded and see it again and again.
Yeah, sure, sir. I have recorded. I will put it. And
Okay.
thank you very much, sir, for your time and effort, sir. Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
sir.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.